Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support this resolution. I smiled when I saw that this particular matter would be before us today because it brings back very fond memories of my time as Minister with responsibility for investment. It is one of the examples of what I see, and I have seen since 2018 when this government came to service, as one of the key indicators of the fact that Barbados is back. We, in many investment fora, coined that particular phrase, and it may sound a bit glib. It may sound like it's easy to say, but it would only sound that way to people who did not have to deal with the fallout of the fact that, as the Honourable Member for St. Lucie highlighted in his brilliant intervention, it would only seem that way to those who did not have to deal with the fallout of the fact that the world had turned its back on this little island. The world had considered that there was nothing to see here, that there was nothing going on in Barbados. Some of the youngsters in my constituency and in St. James South and others would put it, nothing going on but hey, for we. That was not just the local community feeling among some of those young people, but that was the global feeling with respect to this country. And, you know, in 2018, this government hit the ground running, sprinting, speeding. When it was at Belmont, we used to say scratch off. To be able to pull back some of the good spirit, some of the good intent, some of the interest in this country from an investment perspective. So in having investment conversations with people abroad, had to have some very uncomfortable conversations. There was a particular gentleman that we were seeking to engage because he had expressed interest in Barbados. And, you know, I really believe that part of the role of Export Barbados, Invest Barbados, Enterprise Growth Fund Limited, in particular, is not to sit down and cross your arms and wait for business to come. We are small. If we don't get up and see about ourselves, nobody's going to feel for us. And so a part of what we did at the time was to reach out again and to people who had expressed an early interest in Barbados and see, well, are you still interested in bringing this particular development? Are you still interested in starting this project? And time after time, especially in those first few days in June of 2018, it was quite disheartening because there are people who said, if we have to go through what we have gone through in the last 10 years, if we have to deal with some of the dishonesty, if we have to deal with some of the duplicitousness that confronted us when we sought to invest in Barbados, if we have to deal with some of the uncertainty around incentives and around planning, we are not coming back to that jurisdiction. And so we had to set to work through looking at the incentives framework, and I know work is still ongoing in that regard, through looking at the planning and development legislation and many other ways, but also through looking at the integrity and anti-corruption and all of these things. We had to send the message to the international community that we, Barbados, that we are serious people, and that we would not allow the previous 10 years to define who this country and its people would come to be known as or would come to be remembered as. I start there, sir, because there were those who sat back and said, let's see what y'all do. We hear you, but let's see what y'all do. And we understand that, and we showed them that we would be and could be quite aggressive on transforming that investment climate. But there were those, sir, like the proponents of this investment, who displayed what I call persistent investment interest. In other words, they showed that they had confidence in the government that had come to service, had confidence that things would be turned around, but also had confidence in the people of Barbados, in the project of Barbados. That they believed that Barbados is the place to be, not just to be able to have a successful enterprise, but to be able to be in this place that is at the cutting edge of global investment. And I think for many who do not perhaps have the opportunity to sit in these conversations, let us not underestimate the high esteem in which this country is held, because it matters. It doesn't matter because the ministers in cabinet like to put on a jacket and fly around and sit down in meetings because that's what ministers do. That's not why it matters, and that's not why they go to meetings. It matters because we had a decade where nobody wanted to hear from us. Nobody wanted to sit in a room and say, oh, I met the Minister of Environment, or I met the minister at the time it was for the blue economy, one of the first ministries ever created of its kind. And we had the privilege of being able to sit with that minister and discuss issues of marine development and protection. The reason that Barbados, the reason that members of the cabinet, the reason that technical officials have to go out and represent what we stand for and what we believe is because if that is not done, nobody's coming here to check for you and look for you and feel for you. That is the work of engagement. The work of global engagement is about making sure that investments come not just to be able to say this is a $200 million investment or to be able to brag and say this is a $300 million investment, but to be able to say, how will this benefit the people of St. Lucie? How will this benefit the people of Barbados? How will this benefit children in schools who need to have dental care? How will this benefit young people with disabilities who need access to this kind of health care, as the Honourable Member for St. Michael South just importantly pointed out to us? And so the point of all of this engagement is not to be able to sign on a dotted line and pat ourselves on the back, or for government to pat itself on the back. The point of these engagements is to be able to secure the confidence and to convert that investment confidence, investor confidence, into jobs, into infrastructural development, and into the momentum that will mean that growth, job-led, inclusive growth, returns to this country. And so, having been a part of this initial conversation when it started, having been a part of and witnessed the persistence of this group of people who said, look, yes, we might be able to go somewhere else that has the land available today, but Barbados is the place to be in matters of this nature. Barbados is the place to be to engage in the education sector because we've seen what you did with Ross University and we've seen what you've done with others. Barbados is the place to be with respect to medical care because we see the plans that you have for being able to have universal tertiary health care and to be able to get to that point. And so this is the kind of investment that from the very beginning said to me, people are believing in Barbados again. And this, notwithstanding what we heard from the member who led from St. George South, of all the various difficulties, it was difficult to be able to find appropriate land for an investment of this nature. And when I had responsibility for investment, we considered, we thought about it. I will admit it kept me up at night. The area that was identified close to the University of the West Indies was not appropriate from a planning perspective and so many other perspectives. And these people who wanted to be able to come and say, look, this is not just about building a dental school. This is about being able to engage with local dentists. This is about being able to give internships so people can practice. This is about being able to provide services to the surrounding community. This is about being able to develop the community in which we operate. They were persistent. And that persistence said to me that there was something, not just for them, but for many others, about the quality of Barbadian life and values that they wanted to be a part of. And so I'm happy to see that this particular investment goes forward with a view to incorporate all of those benefits to the community, because ultimately that is what this kind of investment is about. Now, the Honourable Member for St. James Central, who spoke before me, is causing me to go where I had not intended, because he made such clear and precise references to the planning and development reform that I had the honor of leading starting in 2019. And I agree with him that when matters like this come before us, they show us, they tell us, they indicate to us that we need to stay focused on this business of having a balance of development that does not just relate to geographical balance, but a balance of development that also relates to the purpose for development and land use and infrastructure, whether that purpose is housing, commercial development, social care, including health and education, but also health and education as industries in themselves, but also whether that is recreation and being able to maintain the ecological balance that is so necessary for small islands like ours. And so when that Planning and Development Act was passed in 2019 and then became the subject of an amendment in 2020, it was always clear and understood that it will have to be accompanied by a very specific and precise change management process that we initiated at the time. I say that because I am following on from that honourable member's caution and statement to us that development is a continuum, it is a journey. And while one can pass legislation, it does not begin and end, as we all know, with the passing of legislation. The change management that we, at the time, identified the resources for and that I understand is now taking place is crucial, so that those who are tasked with executing, with administering the Planning and Development Act have the wherewithal to do so. I emphasize this because I want us all to understand, every Barbadian to understand, that you don't pass legislation today and tomorrow you find yourself ready and in shape in every instance to administer that legislation. In a country of our size, with resources thin on the ground, sometimes what is also required, and is required, you will find, sir, I am sure, across every reform or transformation exercise in which this government is engaged, including in the education sector, including in the housing sector, including in the agriculture sector, for sure in the people empowerment sector, that institutional change has to take place. The institutions that are going to be responsible for this have to be made to be fit for purpose in order to carry on and carry out the work of transformation. And so I'm happy that that change management process is continuing. I also note that the e-planning system that was also launched at that time when I had the honor to lead that department is also evolving, and meaning that there is more convenience for everyone who has to interact with the system. And so those things continue, and I really, from a distance, from this perspective, feel very proud of the Planning and Development Department and the officers for the work that they continue to do, and of course for the minister who now leads the sector. But sir, I could not touch on this particular piece of legislation and this reform process without returning to something that is unresolved. And it occurs to me more and more every day as the hurricane season has started. It occurs to me more and more every day as we from time to time see through the media or otherwise the plight of some Barbadians whose homes are not in livable or in stable condition. And I say stable because we know that in the Scotland district there are some stability issues that are related to the topography and the terrain, and that some Barbadians who find themselves there have to be concerned with whether their homes will remain in the same position they were in when they went to sleep the night. Now, there was contemplated at the time of that legislation being passed a system whereby a building code and therefore certificates of occupancy would be included as a part of the regulation of how people build and how people live, and therefore the security with which they live. Now, sir, I believe that sometimes, and I can see, and I know that this government is not afraid of difficult conversations. Several difficult conversations are happening now, and they are necessary conversations. Similarly, this question of whether a dwelling should pass a test of occupancy once it is constructed is one to which I think we should return. In the question of the water sector, rainwater harvesting, making sure that households have water storage available, and in that entire discussion, there is the conversation about a plumbing code. But I don't know how you can introduce a plumbing code without a building code, unless the only thing you put in the house is plumbing. Any plumbing code would have to be a part of an agreed piece of legislation that addresses the matter of a building code, especially for large commercial properties where people have to, which the public must frequent, but in particular for homes, for houses, to make sure that in the context of being vulnerable to hurricanes and other kinds of natural disasters, that when you as a contractor finish building a home for an individual, for old lady that, or for a young person that put all their dollars and cents together and count out all their money and say, yes, this is what I have to build this house, that you have a responsibility to make sure that that house is safe and livable, and that it is able to meet all of the requirements in a 2023, 2025, 2030 Barbados that allow people to live well. Not just to be in the elements, but to be able to live well. And so, I challenge us to return to that legislation, to see the extent to which we can proclaim the sections that are relevant to having a building code, to making sure that we go the full distance, as the Honourable Member for St. James Central has entreated us to do in his remarks this morning, to ensure that we go the full distance with respect to occupancy, making sure that people are safe, and so on. My final 2 points, sir, have to do with more general issues that this resolution throws up. Sir, every generation has its major reform that it has to undertake. And, you know, I think perhaps one of the things to which Barbadians are unaccustomed, have become unaccustomed, is the issue of a transformational government. Because we had this decade of people just treading water and really just trying to keep their head up. And really, while they're trying to keep their head up, the rest of Barbados under them, you know, because they're clamoring up on the shoulders of poor Barbadians that were drowning. But I believe what we are seeing now is a Barbados that is so unaccustomed to seeing real transformation that we don't know what to do. And I understand the tension. We are seeing proposed transformation in the education sector. We are seeing a level of consultation, Mr. Speaker, I was going to call the number, but I don't want to disabuse people of certain notions of my youth. But in my several decades, I have not seen this level of consultation with any government in the Western Hemisphere. And I feel that we are uncomfortable, and sometimes discomfort is good. You know, remember for St. Michael South and others are trying to get in shape for Kadooment Day. And the only way that those muscles are going to grow is if they experience some discomfort. You got to break them down and build them back up. Discomfort leads to growth. So I think that we should get comfortable with the idea of discomfort. I think we should get comfortable with the idea of disagreeing, because disagreeing doesn't mean that we have to become disagreeable with each other. Let all ideas contend, but at the end of the day, we have to make decisions that are in the best interest of the populations that we are here to serve and to protect. And so I have always thought that every generation of a government would have its major transformation that it had to undertake. But it turns out that this particular generation of this government has several transformations that it has to undertake at once, because guess what? Nobody's time is not waiting for us. But I do feel deeply that the one that we are not paying sufficient attention to, and believe me, sir, I know that every ball is in the air at once, and perhaps this ball is one that will be thrown up later. But land reform, land rights, land use are not getting enough attention. The extent to which ownership of land, housing, I see the attention it's getting. We hear about all of the targets, but the question of whether, of the extent to which we will move that needle along, such that every Barbadian ceases to become a tenant in their own country in the true sense of that expression. Every civilization that has seen true development and transformation has done so in part through the issue of land reform. Who owns it? Who has access to it? What are the tools available to people to manage and plan their estate, to pass on ownership to future generations, to be able to bring about intergenerational wealth and prosperity? We have to get this issue of land regulation and reform right. It is a big part of the unfinished business of the ideology of the Labour Party that causes us to be here. And sir, on another occasion, I will be able to expound more on what I believe must be some of the land reform targets for a 2023 Barbados. But I want to finish with a question, really, to the honorable member who led this landmark resolution, really, that allows for this very important investment. I mean, sometimes we say investment and it sounds like it's about money, but this is also a very important social investment. This is also a very important physical and infrastructural investment for the community in St. Lucie. But for the minister who led this very important resolution. And I really, in my question, I'm encouraging him to explain to us and be clear to us and answer for us, because I know that it is on the minds of Barbadians, the issue of the business of compulsory acquisition. And I put that out there because in all of this discomfort that we're having with certain issues, let us address the discomfort. There is an extent to which the notion of compulsory acquisition does not rest well on people's bosoms. We understand that in particular where there are issues of public safety, so for example, the culverts in George Street, where when the little children are walking in from school, they don't have any space to walk because private enterprises have not encroached, but certainly have taken up all of the available space. And so if the government were to say we need to compulsorily acquire the sliver of land that will allow us to build up those sidewalks and culverts in George Street, then one would understand. For issues that, for matters of public interest, public safety, one understands that if I have to, for example, build a reservoir that is going to mean that a community has access to water where they were previously water insecure, we understand. The question of the compulsory acquisition of private land for private investment purposes is one that perhaps people will have questions about. It is clearly and obviously within the law and within the notions of eminent domain. But I think that we do not do service to ourselves as a society that has to evolve if we fail to make this matter clear. I do know that there are other tools that are available. But I think that it is fitting to be able to say under what circumstances that facilitation goes beyond simply allowing an investment to happen and the government taking an interest in having an investment of this nature, of this scope, of this potential benefit to the country, causing it to occur through the role or through the process of compulsory acquisition. I do not think that it is, I don't think that it is something that we should shy away from. To be able to make it clear, I think that we perhaps might want to reinforce that this path is only taken in cases where there is no other path that makes itself apparent to the state in facilitating an investment of this scope and with this potential benefit to the country. But I raise it because we have seen, and sir, as we always say in this place, we govern not for ourselves and this time, but we govern for the future. And we certainly govern based on our experience in the past. And I have seen a former administration led by the other side, to the extent that there is an other, where they compulsorily acquired land for purposes that they said would be for the benefit and that we were to take for granted would be for the benefit of Barbadians, but then failed to develop that land to its true investment potential. And even if merely from a natural justice, morality kind of perspective, and I say this as a layperson in legal matters, but one has a natural inclination to justice. I would hope that those who occupy this chamber have a natural inclination to justice. And so one might think, well, if you took this land from me, compensated me for it, yes, but took this land from me with the expectation that it would be developed in this way, then you have a duty to ensure that it's developed in this way. And so I know of cases of a former administration that did not fulfill that end of the agreement. And arguably, land that could have otherwise been developed by that person or just held by that person for future generations was used ostensibly for one purpose and never met its full potential. I say these things, I pose this question, because I really believe that Barbadians are ready to hear a bit more on, and are ready to start to feel a sense of comfort that this business of compulsory acquisition is a last resort approach. And it is a last resort approach when what one stands to lose for Barbados is far too great, and so some action must be taken. But I also gather that there are other kinds of tools that might also be available to the state to be able to facilitate these kinds of investments, and I would welcome an explanation in this regard. Sir, I support this resolution. I support this project. I feel happy for the member for St. Lucie and for the people of St. Lucie. I feel optimistic that we are starting to approach a balance of development geographically, but that we are also starting to approach the balance of development that the Honourable Member for St. James South pointed us towards. St. Michael South pointed us towards, that is about making sure that everyone has access, all have access, and to be able to give visibility to the groups of people, whether they are living in St. Lucie or whether they are living all across Barbados but have particular challenges in accessing dental care. I feel confident that we are approaching that balance of development. And with those words, sir, I support this resolution.